Story 1. I was a dumb 17-year-old. My friend Joe and I smoked weed a lot. One of them guys we brought it from, David, was in his early 30s, lived in a normal house, had a wife, who he was in the process of divorcing and not living with, and 1 or 2 young kids. But he sold a lot of stuff besides weed, pills, meth, etc. So he was involved with some sketchy people, but he was always really nice to us. A few times he fronted us weed when we couldn't afford it. One time I had the worst day ever, and he just gave me some just to be nice. So needless to say, what happened to him really scared and upset me. One night, sometime between 9 to 10 p.m., Joe and I went over to get some weed. David told us he was waiting on his connection to drop it off. It'd be about an hour if we wanted to wait here. I said, "Yay, sure, no big deal." But Joe said, "No, I want to leave." I looked at him, surprised, and said, "It's just an hour wait. By the time we drive home and come back, it will be an hour anyways." Joe said, "No, I think we should leave. I just don't want to stay here." I asked him why, but he said he just got a bad feeling. I will admit that David did seem off. He seemed really nervous and tense. There was a girl I knew from school there. Like everyone bought weed from this guy. She decided to wait, but Joe didn't want to, so I left with Joe. About an hour or 2 later, we tried calling David. No answer. He never called back, so we just hung out and watched TV till the next morning. He still didn't answer, so we drove by there. We really wanted our weed. And the entire house is covered in crime scene tape. Part of the house is black and obvious. There was an extremely recent fire that significantly damaged the home. We had no clue what happened and weren't about to stop and ask the cops there. I found out from the news and then from friends of ours what happened. Around 12 a.m., 3 guys kicked down the door. David and the girl I knew from school were sitting on the couch. They were both shot in the head and killed instantly. The guys then tried to set the house on fire to destroy any evidence. But a neighbor called the fire dep shortly after they left, so the house wasn't badly burned enough to destroy much evidence. It took them years to catch the guys who did it. Story 2. Family all visited my grandparents, and I always took that time to be rowdy outside with my cousin. We played games inside all day until they told us to play outside. Walking around at night with my cousin, we tried to come back to the house, and turns out we got locked out as it was like 12. And they thought we were in bed. We had his yellow lab Yoshi walking with us. They lived pretty deep in the country, so his dog was used to coyotes, bears, etc. I got this awful feeling in my chest. Mentioned it to my cousin, who just said, "Yoshi isn't acting weird, so everything is okay." I trusted that for the most part, but knew Yoshi could outrun us, and we really didn't have a house to bolt back into in case something happened. We kept walking until I nearly tripped on Yoshi, who was just frozen and whimpering. Her tail was between her legs and she was staring at this huge bush. The feeling I had in my gut hadn't left me, and I just panicked and stared into the bush. I heard a rustle and Yoshi started barking like crazy, before growling. My cousin and I took that cue to take off running back towards the house. I heard Yoshi yelp, but we kept running. Whatever it was didn't follow us, and after about 5 minutes, Yoshi came running back to us. She didn't have any scratches on her, but it scared the shit out of me. After we calmed down, I remembered my grandma telling everyone she could have sworn she saw a mountain lion in her garden a few days ago. They were in Oklahoma, so no one took that seriously, as a mountain lion that far into OK was pretty uncommon. Week or so later, it was all over the news that there was a mountain lion in the area. It had been hit and killed a few miles from where we were. I am positive that the awful feeling I had was us being stalked. Story 3. I got invited to a party by some random guy I met outside a club. I went to said party with him as I was drunk and thought, sure, why not? This entailed going to a rundown house in a council estate, the UK equivalent of a project, I guess. To enter the house, we had to climb in through a window, where there were 5 people sat in a circle made of half-broken chairs and a moldy couch. After entering the window, the guy locked it behind him. It was at this point I instantly felt sober again and realized that something was wrong. That's when the crack cocaine and heroin came out. A woman who was part of the circle, who apparently owned the house, started telling a story about how her husband had hung himself in the stairwell. Her kids had been taken away, and that she kept a sharpened screwdriver under her pillow in case they came for her. I was well past wanting to leave at this point. I didn't have an escape through, and my nervousness showed. That's when paranoia set in within the circle. The guy who had brought me there had become incredibly tense. The slick test noise, and he would flip out. He stood by the curtains, peeping through, mumbling to himself about the police watching him. I had to prove I wasn't wearing a wire at this point. Before long, however, the drugs began to run out. This made the paranoia be temporarily forgotten. I saw a chance here and said I had money, and I could buy more drugs. The guy said he would book a taxi for us to go in. About 15 minutes later, a taxi turned up. He unlocked the window, and I jumped out first and slammed it shut behind me. Ran as fast as I could towards the taxi, jumped in the front seat, and just shouted, "Drive, drive," to the taxi driver, who took off down the street, and to the safety of home. Closest I've ever felt to being murdered. Story 4. Trigger warning for child sexual abuse. I was about 4 or 5, so my brother was 2 or 3. We had a male babysitter who wanted to play a game of taking our pajamas off. It was really weird, and I wouldn't do it, no matter how much he cajoled me. I woke up in the night. My brother was standing up in his crib laughing. My pajama bottoms had been removed and I was being molested. I sat up and he left the room. I got dressed again and waited for my parents to come home, wired with adrenaline. I heard them when they came back. I waited until I could hear that the babysitter was out of the house. Then I ran out to my parents and told them what happened. They didn't really seem to react and sent me back to bed. So I did everything right. The next part is what really fucked up my childhood. A few days later, my mother sat me down and said they had spoken with the sitter's mother, and he wasn't going to do that again. The next time, he was going to babysit. I felt rage. In the following years, I always knew I had been molested, but I blanked out the part about my parents trying to bring the babysitter back. But I did recall it, and the why burned within me. I was also in therapy where I was diagnosed with PTSD. I finally asked my mother why. She said it was the late 60s, not everyone talked about sexual abuse, and they had not believed me. Until they tried to bring him back, and I had an uncharacteristic temper tantrum. Story 5. I worked with a girl when I was 18. She was 4 years older than me, and we came from the same small hometown, so knew some of the same people. I quickly understood she was not a great person. Narcissistic. Loved to pit people at work against each other by spreading rumors. Backhanded compliments, dominated every conversation by turning into something about herself. You probably know the type. She didn't like me because I ended up explaining her behavior to our boss after she tried and failed to get me fired over a rumor she created. She didn't last long, thankfully. People caught on, and they knew me well enough to trust that I'm a decent person in that regard. Fast forward to my later 20s, back in my hometown. She walks into a bar with my friend. We are awkwardly polite. The night wears on, drinks. We get to talking and are actually laughing together. It seems like the past is distant. I say I'm going to leave. She looks directly into my eyes and asks if she can come with me. It was like looking into the eyes of a demon. Every hair on the back of my neck and forearms. Heart rate increased. Cold sweat and the blood drained from my face. But drunk me, severely lonely from previous years, thinking only of that night's chemistry, said yes. Told myself it was just the anxiety of such a physically attractive woman asking to come home with me. We ended up dating for almost a year. I have never been more physically, psychologically, or emotionally abused, cheated on, and just destroyed inside. It was severe. My cat's hair started falling out from the stress in the home. He's been a happy, healthy chunk before and after, don't worry. I won't go into details, but it was ugly. I was so turned around as a male abuse victim that I had been gaslighted into thinking I was an abuser. I finally got out but had to do it alone. With narcissistic abusers, they tend to look for people they can use, that have something, that are unique, stand out, etc. People with potential. I made myself seem thoroughly pathetic. What a person like that would think is pathetic. And she casually moved away and found a new victim. We still shared some friends, and she had convinced most of them that I was a bad person. But in time, her nature hurt all of them, and while I had moved on and made new friends, they slowly trickled back into my life and related their own horror stories of her. Ultimately, I became stronger and grew in many ways from it, and can even trust. But I'll always have to struggle with thinking no one is ever interested in me, so not picking up on it, and confusing boundaries and self-respect for hurting my partner and potentially causing a serious altercation. That night in the bar, I should have just left. Every sense in my body told me to get away from her, but I stayed. Story 6. In my 30s, my husband was having an affair and I was sick of staying home alone, so I went to a dance club in Boise by myself. I had a fantastic time and met a friendly couple, James and Tammy. Ended up spending most of the night with them, laughing, dancing, joking. Just really fun, open people. We shut the place down and out on the sidewalk, Tammy says, "Want to go for pancakes?" "That's a great idea. I'm starved," I said. "My car's around the corner. Should I just follow you to the restaurant?" "No, don't do that. We'll give you a ride, then bring you back," said Tammy. "Thank you," I said. "I'm worn out from all that dancing, haha." As soon as I get in the car and it pulls away from the curb, I get this sense of dread. Just a few blocks down the road, James says he wants to pick something up at their apartment and asks if it's okay if we stop off there for a minute. I'm ignoring my warning bells, still hoping that everything's okay. Don't want to ruin a great night by freaking out unnecessarily. They're both still super casual and friendly, so I say, "Okay." A short jaunt turns into a long drive, getting further and further away from any restaurant. We get to their apartment, which is really low rent and scummy, and my alarms are getting louder. "I'll just wait in the car while you get your thing," I said. Tammy stays too, and we talk about this and that, and I start to relax again. There's no pressure coming from her. She genuinely seems delighted to have made a new friend. "Let's go check on James," she says after a bit. As soon as I walk through the door, I know I'm in trouble. Tammy's between me and the only door, and James is on the sofa watching TV. Why is he watching TV? Tammy offers me a drink, which I decline, then goes to fix herself one. "Are we staying here?" I ask. "Let's go to the restaurant." "You bet. I just want one drink, then we'll go." All this time, James is silent, staring fixedly at the TV, all tense and excited, but trying not to show it. I'm getting super weird, scary vibes from him and this whole situation. "Do you party?" Tammy asks brightly. I'm distracted and have no idea what this means, so I say, "I guess." She sets up some cocaine on the coffee table and she and James have a toot. I've never seen cocaine in my life. I can't believe what I've gotten myself into. I look away from the coffee table toward the TV and finally realize that James is watching gangbang pornography. I stand up and announce that I'm going to call a cab. "Oh, don't. Do you want to go?" "Yeah," I say faux apologetically. "I'm just really tired." I start walking for the door. "We'll take you back. Don't pay for a cab, honey. We'll drive you." I don't remember how she convinced me to get back in the car, but she and James ended up driving me back to the bar and giving me a friendly wave as they drove away. I think it was an honest misunderstanding. They thought they'd found a willing third, and if I wasn't down with a threesome, that was perfectly okay. And cocaine was just a normal Saturday night, I guess. But man, when I recall turning to face that TV screen, my heart still drops into my stomach. I always trust my instincts now. Story 7. Went to visit my sister in a very small town for the school holidays, met some guys, 2 guys across the street from her house, hung out with them for a couple of days, smoked a lot of weed. Weed supply got low and the one guy said we could go get some more from his friends. Got in the car and he pulled up at a police station and went in, said he'll be back soon. Bad feeling, paranoid AF, and as high as a kite, me and the one guy in the car freaked out as we were planning our escape. I was sitting in the back, only 2-door car. The guy came out of police station with 4 cops. They got in their police van, and he got back in casually. We were asking loads of questions, but all he said was, "Just chill, and you'll be fine." He drove deep into the woods plantation with the police following us. I left my phone at his house. Don't know her number by heart. Couldn't let my sister know where I am. Guys in front won't give me their phone. At that moment I thought, this is how I die and my body will never be found or get sold on the black market. Thoughts racing wild in my mind, trying to plan which way to run. Only girl between 6 men, 4 of them armed, don't know their last names, nothing. We stopped in the middle of nowhere. Both guys and the shady-looking cops got out, stood on side and chatted. One cop instructed the guy that was driving to get me. I refused to get out the car. Guy promised me everything will be fine. I just thought, it's over, let me just cooperate. Cops asked me if I have been smoking weed where I'm from. Does anyone know where I am? Do I have a phone on me? Answered honestly. Stupid, I know. The interrogating cop grinned and said, "Well, that's great news. Looks like we will be having some fun today." Other cops and guys chuckled. He pulled out a massive joint, lit it up, and blew the biggest cloud I have ever seen. As it all turned out, we had a great time, smoking some A-class evidence. Turns out all the guys were great, had a blast, came out of the situation unscathed, with a great story to tell. Story 8. I went to a house party thrown by a friend, and while I was there, I met a bunch of people whom I ended up having fun with. A little while after midnight, one of the guys I met asked if I want to go clubbing with their group, so he called an Uber, and I went with them. The red flags started popping up when we were lining up for the first club we went to. He was saying stuff like, "I only wanted to go to town because you wanted to," even though he was the one who asked me to come. He then proceeded asking questions about my living situation. I live in a very strict apartment where you need an access key card just to get into the building, and one of the rules stated in the contract was no visitors after 10 p.m. The guy clearly wanted to go home with me after clubbing because he kept trying to make loopholes just so he could come back with me to my place. I was persistent in saying no to all his efforts on that matter. Later on, when we finally got into the club, we lost the other people we came with. At that time I didn't think much of it, but looking back at it, I now find it quite dodgy. How he didn't even try and look for them, and that he was intentionally trying to separate me and him from the group. After buying some drinks, me and the guy, it was just the two of us at this point, bumped into a group of people he knew from high school. While the guys were catching up, I was talking to the girls in that group. They were so kind and friendly that I was going to stay a bit longer to talk, but the guy pulled me away and said, "They're just going to talk your ear off," and pulled me to the dance floor. Not even 30 minutes later, he asked me if I want to go to a different club because the music sucked at that one, and I agreed to it. While we were making our way through the crowd, heading for the exit, I saw one of the guys who we were with at the beginning of that night, and I tried calling out his name. But the guy ended up pulling me away and saying, "It's fine, he's in his own vibe, let's just go." When we were walking to the other club, he was telling me about the fights he's had at his workplace, and it honestly kind of bothered me. How much he was bragging about getting into fights. He works at a club, but that night it was his day off. When we finally got to the other club, I felt more and more uncomfortable as he was trying to position me so he can grind on me while we were on the dance floor. He was literally grabbing me like I'm a rag doll. Every time I moved towards the crowd, he would try and lead me back towards the wall, and it confused me at first as to why he was doing that. Eventually, he tried pinning me against the wall and talking to me with his mouth close to my ear, as though he was just waiting for the timing to try and do something else. I managed to get away from that position, but then he grabbed me and wrapped one arm around my waist, and the other one was kind of just going places while his groin was pressed against my back. I was trying my best to move forward to break free from him, but every time I do, he would just pull me back. After a while, I told him I needed water because I was trying to come up with a way to get away from him, but he just followed me. While I was at the bar getting water, I told him I was tired and I just wanted to go home, and he became agitated, telling me I killed his vibe and how I ruined his night and he wouldn't have gone clubbing if it weren't for me, etc. I'm thankful nothing worse happened to me that night, but to be honest, I let my fear and anxiety get the best of me, hence why I decided to just go with the flow instead of walking away from the situation or calling a bouncer for help because I didn't want to cause a scene and create drama, especially because we have mutual friends. I've definitely learned my lesson though. Story 9. Almost 2 years ago, I was at a house party. It was very small, about 12 people there, and I was good friends with the host, so I stayed over rather than walk all the way across town drunk in the middle of the night. I was the youngest person there by a few years, 19 but above legal drinking age. The party was wrapping up and I fell asleep in an armchair in the living room, but was woken up a few hours later by the host asking me to look after his friend. The friend was someone I knew and liked. He was about 30 and was a bouncer at a local bar, and I trusted him. He had had too much to drink and was crying and being sick. I stayed up with him for a few hours listening to everything he had to say, such as how lonely he felt without having a girlfriend, about cancer treatment he told barely anyone about, and just about life, really. I just stayed rubbing his back until he fell asleep on the sofa, and I went back to the armchair. We woke up early the next morning around the same time. I started getting ready to walk back home, but as I was doing so, the friend started complaining that he was cold. I found a blanket in the corner and threw it on him. He said that he was still cold and he wanted a hug. I felt huge hesitation and uncertainty in that moment and knew I should have just left. That's when I should have left. But I didn't. I stayed. I felt sorry for him for everything he said the night before, so I stayed. I hugged him, and he pulled me onto the sofa with him, spooning me for a while. His hands started to wander and I tried to get up to go home. He held me down with an arm around my chest. I told him that I needed to go home, but he would just shush me. I've been assaulted in the past growing up and my brain just froze, and so did I. He went all the way whilst I just watched the clock on the wall. He didn't finish as he was interrupted by people coming downstairs and I made my exit quickly. It's had lasting effects on me mentally, and I moved away a few weeks after it happened. I occasionally go back to my hometown to see my parents, but I'm stressed and anxious the whole time, never staying a second longer than necessary. I regret not being more assertive and leaving when I had the chance, but I guess what's done is done. Story 10. They tried to kill me when I did leave. I met this person when I was in a particularly dark place. They were nice on the surface, but something felt very off. I hated them and couldn't point at why. So I kept being nice and giving them a chance because they hadn't done anything wrong. They seemed very sweet and seemed to have taken upon themselves to take care of me, which is something I desperately needed. Nobody else gave a flying fuck, so we started dating, despite an increasing number of red flags and a constant troubling feeling that this is just wrong. Now, we talked multiple times about mental health. I just lost someone I loved to schizophrenia, and I was deeply distraught, so I made it very clear that if I get to a point of losing grasp on reality in such a manner, I would commit suicide. Hell, I made them promise me that they would assist me if things ever came to it. Eventually, I started getting my life back together, and it was clear this person should not be a part of it. I wasn't attracted to them, there was no way I could build a life with them, and I was fed up with the creepy feeling that's always there. They were obviously upset, but since we had a falling out for quite a while, seemed largely accepting. They started dating someone else in less than a week. I started dating someone else pretty quickly, too, for the sake of convenience. Let's call her Michelle. Soon enough, things started to happen. I started getting the feeling that people around me are suddenly cold and hostile. People I barely know, or literally just met too. Exes resurfaced and started accusing me of abusing them, or making up events I clearly remembered that happened. At one point, I thought that something must be up, but then realizing how crazy that sounded, I concluded I was probably losing it. I locked myself in my room and refused to see anyone in fear I would hurt them while trying to figure out how to pull the plug on myself. Then Michelle calls. I don't remember if she did or just showed up, and said that, "You're not crazy, something really is up." As it turns out, my ex did a mistake. They sent their new girlfriend to warn Michelle about me, and that girlfriend was a bit of an idiot. So she told Michelle exactly what was going on. Ex was contacting friends and random people in my general circle, telling them I was a monster, contacting my exes and getting them to do the same, in hope that I realize I'm dangerous, and do the responsible thing, and kill myself. Story 11. Well, nothing that I know of happened to the person while I was there and after I left, but the feeling of wanting to leave definitely happened. When I was in high school, I went to this girl's house so that we could work on a project we were supposed to do. I arrived there and am greeted by her father, a very extroverted guy. He was very loud and smiley and very, "Hi, hey, how are you? Yay." You would think he was just a bubbly guy, but he was a little too extroverted for my taste. Anyway, before we get started on our project, the father mentions that they are evangelical Christians, and that in their house they only listen to and watch gospel stuff, that their house is the Lord's house, and so on. In my head, I'm like, sure, whatever, and we move on. At one point, I was by myself doing part of the homework in the living room and go to the kitchen to get me some water. Mind you, this is a tiny home. It looked like a one-bedroom apartment, so the kitchen was just around the corner, literally. Anyone could have gone there at any moment, such as the mother who was at home. When I get to the kitchen, I see the daughter washing a plate slowly, with a very tense look on her face, and I see her father, right behind her, bodies very close to each other, face near her neck, grabbing and massaging her hair in a very sexual way. All of a sudden, snap. The father goes back to his, "Oh, he, you, hi," facade, And I didn't even blink. I smiled and acted like I hadn't seen anything wrong and said I wanted some water, and that was it. The girl and I go back to the living room, and the girl is like, "I forgive my father." Technically, she was talking about his obnoxiousness, but she was really talking about his abuse, I think. That's what I sensed. I knew that there was something wrong going on, but I played along because I was young and didn't know any better. But that's not the worst of it. A bit later on, the father comes back and all of a sudden decides to talk about hell and about what happens to people who sin, that they burn in there, that they are punished. And I immediately thought, he is threatening her. He wasn't talking about religion. He was telling her to not tell me anything. That's when I was like, I need to get the fuck out of here. I don't remember how much longer I stayed, but it wasn't for very long. The girl and I were acquaintances and never talked about it again. Nowadays, I would have acted differently and would have tried to help her if she wanted to. But it is crazy how some abusers have the nerve to do things right under other people's noses. It gets you thinking,